thought mocking Obama's voice would get him the last laugh, but Obama's quiet comeback left the crowd on their feet, and Trump visibly rattled. The room was already charged before the cameras even began rolling. A town hall in Phoenix, Arizona, with hundreds of people packed into the auditorium and thousands more watching from home, felt less like a civic discussion and more like a heavyweight fight. The stage lights were blinding, the applause signs flashed at the corners, and the moderators tried their best to look calm, even though they knew what everyone else knew. Donald Trump and Barack Obama were about to share the same stage, live unfiltered and unpredictable. The tension came not from surprise, but from expectation. These two men had never been shy about trading barbs from afar. Tonight, however, there was no Twitter screen, no polished campaign speech, no carefully edited interview. It was raw, and the audience could sense it. A woman in the fourth row whispered to her husband, "This is going to get messy," as the camera panned across their faces. Trump, dressed in his trademark dark suit with a red tie knotted tightly, leaned forward in his chair like a boxer itching to throw the first punch. Obama, by contrast, sat upright, calm, his hands folded neatly on his lap, waiting. There was no smile, but there was something behind his eyes, a patience that could easily be mistaken for indifference if you didn't know better. The moderator cleared his throat. "Mr. Trump, the first question goes to you." That was all the opening Trump needed. He turned toward Obama, squinting slightly, and let out a laugh that was more derisive than amused. "You know," he began, "we've heard a lot from Barack over the years. Beautiful speeches, great words, very dramatic pauses. But at the end of the day, folks, it was all talk. No results, nothing happened. 8 years of nothing." The audience chuckled nervously, some clapping, some shaking their heads. It was classic Trump, quick, sharp, and meant to sting. He raised his hands theatrically, mimicking Obama's cadence, stretching out a pause in an exaggerated drawl. "Let me be clear," he said in a mocking voice, tilting his head. The laughter grew louder, at least from his supporters. Obama didn't move. Not a smirk, not a frown. Just a stillness that seemed to expand as the crowd's reaction filled the space. The camera caught him blinking slowly, almost deliberately, before shifting his gaze back toward Trump. The moderator, trying to regain control, interjected, "President Obama, would you like to respond?" But Obama didn't speak right away. That was his move, silence as a weapon. He adjusted his microphone slightly, leaned in, and raised his eyebrow just enough to be noticed. The audience hushed, as if they too realized that something was coming. Trump leaned back, satisfied, smirking at the crowd as if the round had already been won. And that's when the dynamic shifted, because Obama's silence wasn't retreat. It was the gathering of force, the kind that doesn't shout, but lands harder than any insult could. His stillness was a stage, and he knew how to use it. The camera zoomed in close, catching the subtle rhythm of his breathing, the kind of composure that comes only when you know you're holding more than words. You're holding the room itself. When Obama finally opened his mouth, the tone was so measured, so deliberate, it sliced through the noise. "Well," he said, pausing again, "Donald seems to forget a few things." A ripple of anticipation moved across the audience. Even those who had laughed at Trump's impression now leaned forward. Obama hadn't raised his voice, hadn't fired back with sarcasm. Instead, he was building something slower, sharper, and more dangerous. A rebuttal that would feel less like a counterpunch and more like a reminder, a history lesson, a reckoning. The night was no longer just entertainment. It was about to become a moment, one that could redefine how people remembered both men sharing the stage. But before Obama could deliver his first full strike, the tension in the room had already set the stage for something far more impactful than anyone expected. Trump had always thrived on theater. He wasn't simply answering questions that night in Phoenix. He was performing. The crowd, the cameras, the applause meters, all of it energized him. He leaned forward again, almost bouncing in his chair, feeding off the mix of laughter and gasps that followed his opening jab. "Look, I'll give Barack this," Trump continued, wagging a finger toward Obama. "Nobody, and I mean nobody, can talk like him. The pauses, the drama, the voice, perfect, like an actor. But when it came time to actually do something, he couldn't deliver. We got chaos overseas, weak borders, terrible deals. The country was worse off, not better. Everybody knows it." The laughter from his side of the room grew louder. A man in a white polo shirt near the front shouted, "That's right," while others clapped, egging Trump on. He grinned, encouraged by the response, then leaned into the microphone again. "I mean, you remember, right?" Trump said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. He hunched his shoulders, pursed his lips, and mimicked Obama's slow, thoughtful delivery. "Let me be clear." He stretched out each word until the audience broke into another round of chuckles. "That's all we got. Words, just words." The camera cut to Obama. Still no reaction, no visible irritation, just the same measured posture, watching Trump like a chess player sizing up an opponent making reckless moves. That calm was almost unnerving. The moderator tried to step in. "Mr. Trump, let's stay with the question." But Trump waved him off with a dismissive hand. No. People want to hear this. People love this," he said, his voice rising. He pointed again toward Obama. 8 years of promises. Remember healthcare? A total disaster. Remember the economy? I fixed it. I brought it back. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. The split in the room was obvious now. Half the audience laughed and clapped, while the other half sat in stony silence, arms crossed, waiting. Some whispered to each other, their expressions somewhere between disbelief and irritation. Trump smirked, clearly savoring the moment. And let's not forget, folks, he loved being popular. He loved the cameras, the lights, the magazine covers. All talk, no results. If you wanted a speech, he was your guy. If you wanted real results, you had to wait for me. The crowd roared on his side. He threw his hands out wide like a showman soaking up applause. The moderator, exasperated, turned to Obama. "President Obama, your response?" Obama leaned in slightly, but again no words came. The silence stretched for just long enough to make people fidget in their seats. Some of Trump's supporters laughed again, but softer this time. It wasn't the laughter of confidence, more of a nervous chuckle, unsure of what might come next. Trump, sensing the pause, pressed harder. "Come on, Barack, tell us. Tell the people what you did. Tell them about your amazing results. Because from where I'm sitting, you talked a lot, but nothing happened. 8 years of wasted time." Obama's lips curved just slightly, not into a full smile, but enough to suggest that Trump had walked right where he wanted him. The cameras picked it up immediately, flashing that half grin across the giant screens above the stage. The audience saw it too, and the tone in the room shifted. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't arrogance. It was something subtler, a signal that Trump had just set himself up. Obama reached for the microphone, but before speaking, he let the silence linger one beat longer. The pause was strategic, controlled. He was letting the audience catch its breath, letting Trump's words echo just enough so that when the clapback came, it would land twice as hard. Trump shook his head, muttering into his mic, "See, nothing. He's got nothing." And that's when the crowd started to quiet. Even the laughter on Trump's side softened. Everyone realized they were about to witness a shift, not just in tone, but in control. But before Obama finally spoke, the anticipation thickened, and the room braced itself for a response that could either fizzle or ignite the night. The silence became its own kind of thunder. For a man who had built his reputation on words, Obama wielded quiet like a blade. He didn't rush. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he adjusted his posture just slightly, leaned into the microphone, and let his gaze sweep the crowd. The audience followed his every move. People who moments earlier had been laughing at Trump's imitation now leaned forward in their seats, the way you might lean in when a teacher lowers their voice to tell you something important. Obama finally spoke. "Donald," he said evenly, his voice steady, "you have a talent for performance. Nobody's going to take that away from you." He paused. "But facts matter." The room stirred. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience, and even the moderators perked up. Obama's cadence had changed the temperature instantly. Trump rolled his eyes and muttered into his mic, "Here we go." Obama turned toward the crowd, not Trump. "When I took office in 2009, the country was losing 800,000 jobs a month. Families in towns from Toledo, Ohio to Stockton, California were terrified. Retirements were evaporating. People were losing their homes. And Donald wants you to believe that nothing happened during my presidency." He let the words hang for a beat. Well, I think the millions of Americans who went back to work would disagree. A burst of applause came from the left side of the audience. Even those who had been skeptical a moment ago couldn't deny the weight of the memory. Trump leaned toward his mic. Jobs came back because of me. Everybody knows it. I fixed it, not you. Obama didn't look at him. He kept speaking, his voice measured but firm. And when we talk about healthcare, Donald calls it a disaster. But let me ask you, how many of you in this room have a son or daughter with asthma or diabetes or a pre-existing condition? Hands shot up in the audience. Some hesitated, then rose slowly, as if encouraged by others. Obama nodded. Before the Affordable Care Act, those conditions could mean bankruptcy, or worse. Insurance companies could turn you away. Today, millions of families sleep easier because of the protections we put in place. That wasn't talk. That was action. The applause grew louder, spilling across the auditorium. Even the moderator leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. Trump tried again, louder this time. Premiums went through the roof. It was a disaster. Obama finally turned back to him, tilting his head slightly. Donald, you talk about premiums. I talk about parents who can finally take their kids to the doctor without worrying they'll lose their home. That's the difference. The crowd roared. The camera panned to a young mother in the audience, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched the hand of her child. Trump shifted in his chair, visibly irritated now. He muttered, "Fake news," under his breath, but the microphones caught it. Obama ignored him and kept his focus on the people. Leadership isn't about mocking. It isn't about who can get the biggest laugh line. It's about results that touch real lives. It's about responsibility. For the first time that night, Trump didn't have a comeback. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, tapping his fingers on the desk. The camera caught the flicker of frustration across his face. Obama leaned back slightly, his hands still folded in front of him. The calm never broke. He had done what Trump couldn't. He turned mockery into a mirror, reflecting the weight of his own record against the bluster of his opponent. The audience sensed it too. Applause turned into cheers, then into chants of, "Obama! Obama!" The moderators tried to regain control, but the momentum had shifted, and as the noise filled the auditorium, Obama remained still, letting the response speak louder than any punchline ever could. But the night wasn't over, and both men knew the confrontation was about to move from memory to direct comparison, a clash of records that would test more than wit. The chants didn't last long. The moderators managed to calm the crowd, urging everyone back into their seats. But even after the applause died down, there was no mistaking the shift. The stage no longer belonged to Trump's one-liners. The room belonged to Obama. Obama leaned forward, hands clasped loosely, and spoke again in the same measured tone. Donald wants you to believe that governing is about who can throw the sharpest insult, that it's about performance. But here's the thing. Leadership is about what you leave behind when the show is over. The words carried weight because he wasn't shouting. He was talking like a man who had nothing to prove. That made it sting even more. Trump straightened in his chair, clearly trying to reclaim the momentum. What you left behind, he shot back, was a mess. You had the worst recovery in history, the weakest military, and everybody was laughing at us. Obama's expression didn't change. He leaned into the microphone. Let's talk about that mess. In 2008, this country faced the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Banks collapsing, homes foreclosed, small businesses shuttered. We didn't just pull back from the edge, we grew. We created 75 consecutive months of job growth by the time I left office. That wasn't luck. That was work. The audience erupted again. Some clapped, others nodded, murmuring in agreement. The split in the room was still visible, but the balance had shifted. Obama wasn't just defending himself, he was dismantling Trump's narrative piece by piece. Trump jabbed a finger in Obama's direction. That's not true. That's fake numbers. Everyone knows the economy only got strong after I came in. Everyone says it. Obama turned slightly toward him, finally addressing him directly. Donald, you can repeat something 100 times, but repetition doesn't make it true. He paused, letting the line land. The crowd reacted instantly. Laughter, applause, even a few whistles. Trump waved his hands. The stock market hit records because of me, not you, me. Obama's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained calm. Donald, The market had already nearly doubled during my time in office before you ever stepped foot in the White House. You inherited momentum. You didn't start the engine. You just sat in the driver's seat while it was already moving. The audience roared again, some standing this time. The moderators exchanged glances, realizing this exchange was slipping from their control, but they didn't dare cut it off. It was too raw, too compelling. Trump muttered, "Totally false," but his voice lacked the earlier swagger. Obama pressed forward. And when it came to foreign policy, let's be clear. You talk about respect. When I walked into the Oval Office, America's image abroad was in tatters because of a war built on false pretenses. When I left, our alliances were stronger, not weaker. And we had built coalitions to deal with threats like ISIS. That wasn't talk. That was leadership. The applause thundered again. Trump, visibly flustered, leaned into his mic. You left the world a mess. Everybody knows it. Total mess. Obama leaned back, tilting his head slightly. Well, Donald, sometimes cleaning up a mess doesn't look glamorous. But ask the families of the soldiers we brought home if it mattered. Ask the people who found work after the crash if it mattered. Ask the kids with health care if it mattered. There was nothing flashy in his tone, but the power came from its clarity. The audience wasn't just hearing a counter-argument. They were hearing receipts, laid out in plain language. Trump fumbled for a response, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. He tried to laugh it off, but the laugh fell flat. The camera caught him shifting in his seat, blinking rapidly, his usual swagger replaced with a trace of frustration. Obama, meanwhile, didn't press further. He simply folded his hands and waited. That was the most devastating part. He didn't need to overplay his hand. The silence after his words made the clapback sting harder than any insult could. But while Obama had clearly regained control of the stage, the confrontation was far from over, and Trump wasn't about to let the spotlight slip away without another fight. The moderators shuffled their papers, glancing nervously at each other, but neither dared to cut off the exchange. The atmosphere inside the Phoenix auditorium had shifted from comedy to confrontation, and every camera in the room was glued to the two men. Trump leaned in again, this time with his voice raised. You talk about job growth, Barack. You talk about healthcare, foreign policy, whatever. But the truth is, when I came in, the country was broken. People were tired of being lied to. You left us with nothing but debt, division, and weakness. Everybody knows it. Everybody. The words were sharp, but they landed differently now. Earlier, the audience laughed easily at his jabs. Now, the laughter was scattered, thinner. A few people clapped, but the momentum wasn't the same. Obama took his time, as though he had all the space in the world. He looked out at the audience, not at Trump, and spoke with a tone that was calm but undeniable. Donald says I left him nothing. Let's look at the record. In 2009, unemployment hit 10%. By the time I left office, it was 4.7%. That's not nothing. That's nearly cutting unemployment in half. The crowd broke into applause again. Obama didn't stop. He talks about debt. Well, when I walked in, we were spending billions each month on a war that had no clear mission. We brought that down. We ended combat operations in Iraq. We didn't just cut spending. We brought soldiers home. That's not nothing. That's lives. The applause turned into cheers. Trump's face tightened. He jabbed at the microphone again. You weakened the military. Everybody said it. I rebuilt it. You made us look soft. Obama turned to him with a steady gaze. I strengthened alliances that had been ignored. NATO, for example. You measure power by how many bombs you can drop. I measure it by how many wars you don't have to fight because you have allies standing beside you. That's real strength. The crowd erupted once more, louder than before. Trump leaned back, shaking his head, muttering something inaudible. He grabbed his water glass, took a sip, and then set it down harder than he meant to, the microphone catching the thud. Obama continued, his tone still even, almost professorial. Donald wants to say he fixed everything, but the truth is, he inherited a recovery in motion. He inherited a military respected around the world. He inherited protections for families who could finally breathe when their kids got sick. Those things didn't happen by accident. They were choices, hard choices. The moderator, sensing the magnitude of the moment, stayed quiet. The audience was hanging on every word. Trump suddenly jumped in, his voice louder, almost shouting. Your economy was the worst recovery ever. Weak. You left us weak. Obama paused, then delivered the line that made the auditorium erupt. Donald, you keep talking about the economy like you built it. But the truth is, you were handed the keys to a car that was already moving. All you had to do was not crash it. The crowd exploded, applause, cheers, even laughter. People stood up, clapping, some whistling. The camera caught a young veteran in uniform pumping his fist in the air. Trump's face reddened. He threw his hands up in frustration. That's ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. Obama didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He simply waited for the noise to settle, then said, "The record speaks for itself. You can mock me. You can mimic my pauses. But facts don't change. History doesn't change." The crowd roared again, and this time it didn't die down quickly. For the first time that night, Trump looked smaller on stage. Not physically, but in presence. His usual dominance, the hand gestures, the one-liners, the bravado, felt muted next to Obama's calm dismantling of his narrative. The cameras caught it. The audience felt it. Obama leaned back, folding his hands again, not chasing the applause, but letting it wash over him. It was the difference between noise and authority. But while Obama had clearly landed a devastating contrast, Trump wasn't the type to back down, and everyone in the room knew he would come back swinging, harder, louder, and more desperate. The energy inside the auditorium had transformed into something almost electric. A few minutes earlier, Trump's jabs had drawn easy laughter, but now the mood was different. The cheers that followed Obama's sharp comparisons weren't just louder. They were steadier, almost defiant. Cameras cut between the two men. Trump's posture had shifted. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw working as he muttered under his breath. He leaned toward his microphone, but each time he opened his mouth, the audience drowned him out with applause. Obama, by contrast, sat still, letting the storm swirl around him as though he had orchestrated it. The moderator raised a hand. "Please, folks, let's bring the room back under control." His voice was strained, but even he seemed caught up in the spectacle. The chants from the back, "Obama! Obama!" eventually died down, but the atmosphere had changed permanently. Trump finally spoke, his voice louder than before. "Look at this. This is a setup. Totally biased. They love him because he's good at speeches. That's all he's got. I built results. I built strength. And I'll tell you right now, nobody respects this guy." The audience reacted immediately, some booing, others yelling back. A man in a suit near the center stood up and shouted, "That's not true," while a group of Trump supporters countered with cheers. The room teetered on the edge of chaos. Obama leaned forward, his expression calm, his voice cutting through the noise like a steady drumbeat. "Donald, you can keep yelling, but yelling doesn't make you right." The audience erupted again, laughter mixing with applause. Trump slammed his hand on the table in frustration. The microphone caught the thump, and cameras zoomed in on his reddening face. Obama kept going, his tone unshaken. "Here's the thing about leadership. It's not about who talks the loudest. It's about who listens. It's about who can sit in a room with people who disagree with them and still find a way to move forward together." A woman in the audience shouted, "Yes," and clapped. The crowd followed with a swell of applause. Trump shook his head furiously. "Forward together? Give me a break. You divided this country. Nobody trusted you. That's why I won. Because you failed. You were weak, and people were tired of weakness." Obama paused for a moment, then leaned closer to his microphone. "You didn't win because people wanted more division. You won because people were hurting, and you told them someone else was to blame. You didn't solve their problems. You gave them someone to point at." The silence after that line was striking. Even Trump's supporters hesitated. Trump jabbed his finger toward Obama, his voice rising. "That's a lie. A total lie." But Obama didn't flinch. He continued, this time speaking directly to the crowd. "When we faced the financial crisis, we didn't ask who to blame. We rolled up our sleeves and got to work. When we passed healthcare reform, we didn't ask who deserved care and who didn't. We made sure families could go to the doctor. That's what leadership looks like." The audience clapped again, this time in a wave that rolled across the auditorium. Some of Trump's supporters stayed quiet, their faces tense. Trump, visibly frustrated, tried to cut back in. "You gave us Obamacare, which everybody hates. You weakened our country. That's the truth." Obama shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. "Donald, sometimes the truth isn't what gets the loudest applause. Sometimes it's the thing you don't want to hear, but it's still the truth." The crowd roared once more. Trump leaned back in his chair, gripping the armrests, his face tight with frustration. The cameras lingered on the contrast, one man leaning calmly on the desk, the other visibly straining to hold his composure. The moderator finally stepped in, his voice cracking slightly. "Gentlemen, let's move to the next question." But the audience barely listened. Everyone knew this exchange had already tipped the balance of the night. Obama had seized control, not through volume or spectacle, but through composure. And in doing so, he had managed something rare. He'd made Trump look rattled. But as the tension simmered, the crowd knew this wasn't just about two men trading barbs. It was about whose vision of leadership would win the night, and Trump was about to make another attempt to claw back the spotlight. The moderator's voice trembled slightly as he shifted to the next question. Let's turn to the topic of democracy and leadership." He hoped the new framing might steer the conversation into calmer waters. Instead, it opened the door for Obama to pivot, and the moment couldn't have been more timely. Obama leaned in, fingers steepled in front of him. Democracy isn't about one person being louder than everyone else. It's about whether leaders serve the people or serve themselves. He paused, scanning the audience. That's the real question tonight, and I think folks here, and watching at home, deserve a straight answer. Trump scoffed loudly, cutting in. "Here we go again. More lecturing. People are tired of it. They don't need a professor. They need results." Obama's eyes flicked toward him briefly, then back to the crowd. "Results? Let's talk about results. We got millions of people insured who didn't have health care before. We pulled the country out of the worst economic crisis since the 1930s. We restored respect for America abroad after years of reckless wars. Those aren't lectures, Donald. Those are results." The audience applauded loudly, and the sound carried through the hall. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, shaking his head as though dismissing every word. Obama continued, his tone soft but cutting. "But beyond policies, leadership is about respect. It's about how you treat people, the poor, the rich, those who agree with you, those who don't. It's about whether you can look someone in the eye and tell them the truth, even if it doesn't benefit you politically." There was a murmur from the audience. Not loud applause this time, but something more powerful. Agreement. People nodded, whispered, leaned closer to catch every word. Trump leaned into his microphone. "Respect? You didn't respect anybody. You spied on me. You lied about me. You left the country divided and weak." Obama tilted his head slightly, the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Donald, respect isn't just what you demand from others. It's what you give. And too often, you confuse being feared with being respected. They're not the same thing." That line struck like a hammer. The audience erupted, clapping, cheering, even whistling. The sound drowned out Trump's attempt to fire back. He shouted something into the mic, but his words were lost in the noise. Obama raised his hand gently, signaling for the audience to quiet down. "This isn't about me or Donald. It's about the kind of example we set. Your kids, your grandkids, they're watching. They see how leaders act when the spotlight's on them. If all they see is mocking and shouting, then that's what they'll think leadership looks like." The camera cut to a teenager in the crowd, seated between his parents, staring at Obama with wide eyes. It was a small moment, but powerful. Obama went on. "Leadership isn't about the applause you get in the moment. It's about the lives you touch long after the cameras are gone. It's about whether people are better off because you held office." The audience gave him another wave of applause, this one slower, more thoughtful. Trump slammed his hand on the desk. "That's nice, very nice, but people didn't feel better off. That's why you're not in office. They voted for me because you failed them." Obama didn't raise his voice. "People will judge both of us, Donald. They'll look at the record, they'll look at the tone, they'll look at the respect, or lack of it, that we showed them. And when history makes its judgment, it won't remember the jokes or the insults. It'll remember who actually made a difference." The room was silent for a moment. The weight of those words hung in the air. Even the moderators sat frozen, unsure of what to say. Finally, the applause broke out again, rolling like a wave across the hall. This time, the sound was less like a cheer for entertainment and more like a recognition of truth. Obama leaned back, his calm demeanor unchanged. He didn't need to gloat. He had delivered something deeper than a clapback. He had drawn a line between mockery and meaning. But while Obama's message resonated powerfully, Trump wasn't about to let the night close without another attempt to regain control, and the stage was set for yet another clash. Trump leaned forward abruptly, gripping the sides of his podium so tightly his knuckles whitened. The smirk he had carried earlier was gone. His voice came out sharper, edged with frustration. "You can give your little speeches all night, Barack. You're good at it. Everybody knows you're good at talking. But when it came to action, you were weak. Weak on China, weak on immigration, weak on everything." Some of his supporters clapped loudly, desperate to give him a boost, but the applause was scattered, hollow, compared to the roar Obama had just received. The imbalance was visible, and Trump seemed to notice. His tone grew louder, almost pleading with the room. "And let me remind you, people suffered under your watch, jobs shipped overseas, cities dying, people forgotten. That's the truth. You left them behind." Obama didn't interrupt. He sat still, watching, as if waiting for the outburst to run its course. The calm only seemed to irritate Trump more. The moderator tried to interject. "Mr. Trump, let's—" Trump waved him off, raising his voice again. No, let him answer me. He wants to talk about leadership? He left people behind. He abandoned American workers while he smiled for the cameras." The audience groaned at the repetition. Some of Trump's supporters clapped again, but others shifted in their seats, uneasy with his anger. Finally, Obama leaned toward his microphone, his voice steady. "Donald, you can shout as loud as you want, but shouting doesn't change the facts. You talk about workers. During my presidency, we brought the auto industry back from the brink of collapse. Factories in Michigan, in Ohio, in Indiana, they were saved. Hundreds of thousands of jobs kept alive. That wasn't weakness, that was action." The crowd erupted. This time, the applause rolled for nearly a full minute. The camera caught workers in the audience, men and women with union shirts clapping and cheering with visible emotion. Trump tried to cut in. "Those jobs left anyway. Everybody knows it. Left to Mexico, left to China. Total disaster." Obama raised his hand slightly, not to Trump, but to the audience, signaling for quiet. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of restraint. "Donald, you can't rewrite history. The auto bailout didn't just keep jobs here, it kept communities alive. Ask the families in Flint, in Detroit, in Lordstown. Ask them if nothing happened." The crowd responded with another thunderous applause, some people even standing. Trump's face turned red. He jabbed his finger across the stage. "You destroyed healthcare. Premiums went up, people couldn't afford it, and you forced it on everyone. Disaster. Everybody says so." Obama didn't take the bait. His voice softened, forcing the audience to lean in. "Premiums were rising before the Affordable Care Act, Donald. What we did was give people coverage they couldn't have gotten otherwise, and millions of young adults stayed on their parents' plans. That meant peace of mind for families. Maybe you don't value that, but those families do." A cheer rose again, louder and more sustained. Trump slammed his palm on the desk. "You left the border open. You let people pour in. I fixed it. I built the wall." Obama's eyebrow arched slightly, the kind of gesture that carried more impact than shouting. "You built a wall that didn't stop the problems. We focused on deporting criminals, on reforming a broken system, on strengthening the border in smarter ways. Leadership isn't about slogans. It's about solutions." The audience roared. Trump's supporters tried to chant his name, but their voices were drowned out by applause and shouts of approval for Obama. Trump, flustered, muttered, "Totally false. Totally false," under his breath. Obama leaned back again, his calm intact. "Donald, leadership isn't measured by how many times you say disaster. It's measured by what you leave behind for the next generation, and shouting doesn't change that." The room erupted one more time, louder than before, shaking the walls of the auditorium. Trump's expression said it all. Irritation, frustration, and something else. The recognition that the stage no longer belonged to him. But the night was far from finished, and while Trump struggled to regain his footing, Obama was preparing to deliver a message that would define not just the evening, but the story people would tell about it afterward. The air in the Phoenix auditorium was heavy, every eye fixed on the stage. Trump had just finished another barrage of accusations, his voice sharp, his hands cutting the air with practiced force. Yet, instead of roaring approval, the audience was split, uncertain, their reactions fractured. For a man who thrived on dominance, that uncertainty was dangerous. Obama leaned toward his microphone. not with aggression, but with patience. "Donald," he said, his voice calm, "you keep telling people everything was a disaster. That's your word for everything. Disaster. But people aren't disasters. Families aren't disasters. Workers aren't disasters. They're people. People who depend on leaders to make decisions that don't just help themselves, but help everyone." The audience clapped, not wildly at first, but steadily, like a drumbeat growing louder with each second. Obama let it build, then continued. "You want to mock me? Fine. You want to insult me? That's politics. But when you insult the progress we made together, you're insulting the millions of Americans who worked hard to rebuild this country after the crisis, and I won't let you do that." That line landed hard. The cheers rose again, this time overpowering any scattered boos from Trump's corner. The cameras cut to faces in the crowd. A steelworker wiping his eyes, a college student shouting in support, an older woman nodding firmly. Trump shook his head, visibly rattled now. "That's not true. People were worse off. Everybody knows it. Everybody says so." Obama's lips curved into that familiar half-smile, and he turned back to Trump with the sharpness of a blade wrapped in velvet. "Donald, you keep saying everybody knows. But the truth doesn't need catchphrases. The truth speaks for itself." The crowd erupted. This time, the cheer wasn't just approval. It was release. People clapped, shouted, whistled, their energy filling the room like a wave that couldn't be contained. Trump tried to talk over it. "Fake news! All fake!" But his words were swallowed by the noise. He gestured wildly at the audience, at the moderators, at the cameras, but the more he spoke, the less control he seemed to have. Obama, in contrast, stayed silent, letting the crowd carry the moment. He didn't need to compete for volume. His composure was the contrast. One man calm, the other flailing. Finally, as the noise softened, Obama leaned forward again, his voice low but piercing. "Leadership isn't about tearing people down to make yourself look bigger. It's about lifting people up, even when it's hard, even when it's not popular. That's what defines character, and that's what separates leaders from performers." The crowd rose to its feet. Cheers shook the walls of the auditorium. The chant returned, "Obama! Obama! Obama!" echoing so loudly that even the moderators gave up trying to quiet it. Trump gripped his podium with both hands, his face flushed. He tried to shout back into his microphone. "This is a setup, totally unfair. The media is against me. The moderators are against me. The audience is against me." His words tumbled over each other, frantic, stripped of their usual swagger. Obama didn't look at him. Instead, he turned toward the crowd. "Donald says it's unfair. But fairness isn't about who claps the loudest. Fairness is about truth. And tonight, people aren't clapping because of me. They're clapping because they remember. They remember when their jobs came back, when their kids could see a doctor, when their country was respected abroad. They're clapping for themselves, not for me." That distinction sealed the moment. The auditorium erupted into the loudest ovation of the night, so powerful that even those watching at home could feel the vibration through their screens. The camera cut to Trump. For the first time all evening, his expression betrayed something rare, uncertainty. The man who had built his image on dominance looked diminished under the weight of the crowd's response. The moderators, stunned, finally spoke up. "Gentlemen, we need to move forward." But everyone in the room knew the truth. The turning point had arrived. Obama had not only defended himself, he had taken control of the narrative, flipping Trump's attack into a rallying cry for something bigger than either man on that stage. But while Obama now had the crowd firmly in his corner, the night wasn't finished, and his closing words would decide whether this moment became just another debate highlight or a piece of history people would talk about for years. The chants in the Phoenix auditorium carried on for nearly a full minute before the moderators could restore any sense of order. Even then, the energy in the room didn't really settle. It just shifted. The crowd had chosen a side. The applause, the cheers, the standing ovation had made it clear. Obama had seized the night. When the noise finally subsided, the moderator leaned in, his voice almost trembling. "President Obama, you can have the final word before we move to closing statements." Obama nodded once, slow and deliberate, then leaned into the microphone. His tone softened, but it carried across the hall with undeniable clarity. "You know, Donald likes to talk about winning. He talks about winners and losers, about who looks strong and who looks weak. But leadership isn't a game. It's not about who gets the loudest cheer or the harshest insult. It's about service. It's about responsibility. And it's about truth. The audience stayed quiet, hanging on each word. Obama's voice dropped slightly lower, the kind of cadence he often used when he wanted his message to sink in. America doesn't need leaders who mock and divide. It needs leaders who can listen, who can heal, who can tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Because at the end of the day, what we leave behind isn't applause lines or TV ratings. What we leave behind is the lives we touch, the opportunities we create, the dignity we restore. The crowd responded with another round of applause, not thunderous this time, but steady and heartfelt. Trump tried to cut in, shaking his head, muttering into his microphone. It's all talk, same old talk. People are tired of it. His voice was audible, but it barely mattered. The room's attention was fixed elsewhere. Obama kept going. We can argue numbers all night. We can trade insults until the cameras stop rolling. But here's what I know, and what I think every person here knows. Leadership is not about tearing people down. It's about lifting them up. It's about making sure the kid in Tucson who's studying by candlelight because her family can't afford electricity has a chance at a better life. It's about making sure the father in Youngstown who just lost his job doesn't lose his hope too. It's about remembering that every decision we make touches real lives, not just talking points. The auditorium was silent, except for the sound of occasional sniffles. The cameras cut to a woman in the third row wiping her eyes with a tissue, her hand clutching the arm of the man next to her. Obama leaned back for a moment, then added, "That's what I tried to do during my time as president. Did we solve every problem? No. Did we make mistakes? Yes. But we didn't give up. We didn't mock the people we were supposed to serve. We didn't turn their struggles into punchlines." The applause swelled again, stronger now, reverberating through the hall. Trump, visibly frustrated, tried one last time. "Nobody believes that. Everybody knows it's lies. Everybody knows." But the words sounded smaller than before, almost drowned out by the wave of clapping that rolled over him. Obama glanced toward him, then back at the audience. "Donald says everybody knows. But what people really know, what they feel in their hearts, is when someone respects them. When someone actually fights for them. That's what matters. Not the show, not the noise. Respect, truth, service." The crowd leapt to its feet, applause echoing so loudly it shook the rafters. The cameras captured it. A sea of people standing, cheering, many with tears in their eyes. Obama lowered his microphone slightly, his face calm, his body language unshaken. He had said what he needed to say. He didn't gloat. He didn't mock. He didn't even